Hello, and welcome to the Concert Chat podcast of the Reno Chamber Orchestra's 25-26 season. I'm your host, Catherine Beeson, and I'm joined by music director Kelly Kuo for the podcast, which today we are calling Emotional Quotient. Because who doesn't want to get inside Kelly's heart and mind? Nobody. That's who. Kelly, what are we going to be sharing with our audience today?
We are going to be talking about the next program in our subscription season, which is going to be performed on February 28th and March 1st of the year. And we are calling it American Voices because it includes compositional voices of 5 different Americans.
For those of you who are watching, you may notice occasionally that Kelly and I each have a drink on hand. We're pairing a leaded and unleaded beverage with each of the subscription concerts for the season, and today's pairings are definitely nostalgia-inspired. I've got a fizzy, minty, lemony, not julep. And Kelly, what are you drinking?
I'm actually drinking a mint julep. However, you'll notice that it's not really the appropriate glass. I apologize, but I guarantee you these are the ingredients of the mint julep. So
okay, excellent. This is not a John Waters scratch and sniff podcast, so no one will ever be able to know. But cheers to you and to American nostalgia.
Cheers.
If you want to pause the show and make your own drink, we've posted the recipes on the website at renochamberorchestra.org. So let's get started. What is the theme or thread running through this program, and how did you end up deciding on the particular works and composers?
You mentioned nostalgia in America, and really the core piece on this program is the second one, and that's Barber's Knoxville Summer of 1915, which is probably one of the most beloved pieces in the literature for voice and orchestra. And starting with that piece as the core, I built around it, trying to think of other American compositional voices that were unique, but at the same time reflected some sort of nostalgia. And so that's how I started building the program.
Oh, I love it. You know, I noticed that the Barber was on the program. Knoxville Summer of 1915 is so evocative, as you mentioned. And I just happened to have this seersucker jacket that I pulled out, even though it's a cold month of the year. We're looking forward to the summertime for sure. Seersucker, which when I bought this jacket, the person who sold it to me couldn't remember the term and called it stretchy gingham, and I have just forever held on to that.
I love it, stretchy gingham. That's going to be forever in my vocabulary now.
I think you need to just subtitle the concert. You need a second subtitle under the concert, stretchy gingham. All right. So we're not starting with the Barber on the program, though. We're starting with Charles Ives' Symphony No. 3, which is subtitled The Camp Meeting. What can you tell us about that piece?
Well, camp meetings were it refers to an early 19th century American religious movement. And people would, from all over the place, from the rural farming community and town folk would all gather in this central location. They would sing, they would pray, and hear preachers who went on a circuit sermonize for several days at each camp. And this was, at a time when the United States was far less developed and very or densely populated. So camp meetings were really opportunities for people who were isolated from other people and other communities to come worship and socialize together. So modern day equivalent would be like a Beyonce concert. So I've experienced one of these camp meetings as a 4-year-old, and then that was sort of a formula in his mind, or it stayed in his mind for a long time as a way of a part of his culture and of his heritage and how he grew up. And so when he wrote this Symphony No. 3, he took essentially a lot of pieces that were sung in these type of camp meetings, these hymns, and found a way in his own style to include them in this composition as a sort of reflection of his own childhood. And as you might know that he was an organist as part of his work, but what you might not know is that he was actually working at an insurance company as a marketing strategist. That's how he became a rich man and then ended up stopping his compositional life. But before he did all of that, he did compose his Symphony No. 3.
And plus a lot more things. I mean, Charles Ives has had such an impact on American composers and on the American sound. I know that his music is sometimes a little bit dissonant. He uses dissonances in a very specific kind of way, and I know that Ives really built on the work of J.S. Bach in terms of the use of dissonance. Do you find a lot of that in Symphony Number 3, the camp meeting?
Well, this is interesting. It's a chamber orchestra, so it's not a huge, large symphonic ensemble that he uses in other pieces of his, where that dissonances show up in different ways. This, you have the strings often assuming the role of like the singing congregation in a camp meeting, but you know how you're in a restaurant eating, minding your own business, and then the table next door starts singing "Happy Birthday," and how there might be some untrained singers, untrained musicians in that group, and all of a sudden "Happy Birthday" starts sounding very dissonant because people are changing key in the middle of the song unintentionally. And that's sort of how I've heard all of these hymns being sung, is that people from all sorts of walks of life were there together, regardless of their musical training, knew the songs by heart, but didn't necessarily have an ear for music, and yet they'd be singing. And so you have these chromatic harmonies that are created just from people trying to sing together. And I love that image. And so next time you want to compare Ives's music to something, just think about "Happy Birthday" and the table next door at your local Olive Garden.
Chili's. Oh, okay. Oh, so close. Yeah, I think too, you can't discount the fact that in using your restaurant scenario, which is perfect, you can't discount the fact that there are conversations happening around you that are all sort of competing, and also there's usually the jukebox is playing, so you have music here, conversations, and "Happy Birthday" all going on at once, and that is such a metaphor for life, and for this melting pot theme that you've got going on this season.
Right. And he uses instruments like their musicologists call them shadow passages, and basically you take a flute or oboe and purposely have them clash with the rest of the orchestra, like they are either lone voices that sing their own way in the congregation, or maybe they're not part of the congregation at all, and they're that conversation you're talking about happening a couple of tables away. It's just part of this everyday dissonance that we experience as a human being in everyday life.
Which is the thing that causes so much richness in our lives too. I may have made a joke earlier in one of our former episodes about working with a Hungarian fiddle player that would just say, "Oh, it's a little paprikás," and just a little extra spice. That's always stuck with me. So next on the program is Samuel Barber's Knoxville Summer of 1915, which is just such it's an intensely beautiful work, but it has maybe the most nostalgia on this program. I don't know, in terms of just the poetry that it's based on, and I wondered if you would like to speak about that a little bit.
Sure. He was commissioned by Eleanor Staber, a very, very famous American soprano, to write a movement for soprano and orchestra, and he selected a passage from a text. Now, you're going to have to correct me on this, Catherine. I'm embarrassed to say, is it James Agee or Agee?
I always say AG, but I could also be wrong because, let's review. I'm a violist.
So I'm just going to say Agee. And it's from his novel, A Death in the Family. And it's about a small boy lying in the grass at his home in Knoxville, Tennessee, just listening to the sounds around him. And he didn't know this at the time, but James Agee was the same age. And the time that he's writing about, when he was 5 or 6 years old, is exactly the same time that Barber was 5 or 6 years old. And remembering these sounds really spoke to him, gave him an immediate sense of his own childhood memories.
That would cause a lot of a rush of nostalgia, I would imagine. How do you see the relationship of the text and the music in this piece?
Mm. It's overall very much like how a child processes, the train of thought. It can be a little um, ADHD in terms of hearing one thing and all of a sudden shifting to another immediately to another thing. It's just very, very natural. Just like we were talking about in a previous episode of going into a Venetian palazzo for the first time and just gazing at everything that's surrounding you. Everything is new. And to a 6-year-old boy, everything is just part of his world. But some things that are new, like some things, it could be a train horn in the background. It could be cars passing by. It could be whatever it is. And I think all of the cadences, the shifting of colors and contrasts of textures is that Barber uses throughout this piece is very much connected to that train of thought from a child's point of view.
Yeah, I think for me one of the concepts from this from the text and the way that Barber supports it that stands out the most is this question of who I am. Right? So the child is somehow aware that they are developing into something larger than their current state, larger and more
Mm-hmm.
complex than their current state, which, speaks to the fact that it's not a child writing it, that it's a man writing about his childhood memory or his childhood sensibility, right? So this prime kind of character is occupying two spaces at once,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this question of who I am comes with a little bit of just a tiny hint of turmoil in the music,
Yep.
which I think is a different way of looking at dissonance, right? It may not be the physical dissonance between notes as much as this cognitive dissonance of, what time and place am I, and who am I going to be, and who am I now?
Right.
Which I find really as a performer and as a listener, that's a pretty intense sort of kernel from which the rest of the piece can grow and also be contextualized. I wonder if there's anything that goes through your mind as you're planning this kind of a program about the way you're going to approach those intensely personal kinds of pieces of music.
As one ages, as I am, as we all do, there's something about remembering things from the past, especially from childhood, which is so meaningful. And I think everyone in life goes through that regarding what age they are. And giving the audience a chance to hear music that so instantly puts you in the past, just from the way that the music is started out with the pacing and the words. There's something about it that you instantly know where you are, and it's not in the current day.
Mm.
And Leontine Price, who was a very famous American soprano who sang this and interpreted this piece iconically, she wrote, as a Southerner, it expresses everything I know about my roots and about my mom and my father and my hometown. You can smell the South in it.
Mm.
And I love that quote because, again, there's something just instantly that you encounter and experience when you hear this music that puts you in a place. And you can't really say that about a lot of music in the first couple seconds of hearing it where you are, but you can with this piece.
I love that she's evoking a different sense altogether. Smell,
Mm-hmm.
and smell is so connected to memory, so that makes sense too. Thanks
Mm-hmm.
for sharing that quote. Our next piece on the program is by a composer that I don't know anything about, and I'm really excited to learn from you, Kelly. Jasmine Barnes. And this is from her Rosa Parks opera, She Who Dared. And it's an aria called When They Ask Me to Stand, Will I? What can
Cool.
you tell us about this next piece on the program?
Well, Jasmine is someone I've worked with closely over the past few years as in my other hat that I wear as Associate Artistic Director of American Lyric Theater.
Mm.
Jasmine is a young composer who was one of the resident artists in the very first cohort of the Composer Librettist Development Program that I was involved in. And our company exists essentially as an incubator to help composers and librettists learn how to work together to create new American opera. And Jasmine was one of the 3 composers that was in the program, and we paired her for the commission of a large-scale opera with Deborah Mouton, who is another Black writer, and they are a true force to be reckoned with. And when it came to finding a subject on which they wanted to write, it actually started with Deborah Mouton. They were down on a trip together in Montgomery, and in talking about it with her family, her mother said, well, your cousin rode the bus before Rosa Parks. And she didn't believe it at first. She did some research, and sure enough, Aurelia Browder was someone who rode the bus before Rosa, and whose name was used in this landmark court case, Browder v. Gale, Browder versus Gale. Tacky Gale was the mayor of Montgomery at the time. And this court case was essentially the court case that desegregated buses and public areas. And yet we didn't know anything about this growing up. At least I didn't learn anything about this.
Same.
We heard about Rosa Parks. And so this opera is about 7 Black women who were involved with the bus protests at the time. And so they changed history by the desegregation of the Montgomery bus system. This is what the opera is about. And it just premiered in Chicago on June 3rd of 2025. And we are so excited that the singer who took on the role of Rosa Parks in this premiere, Jacqueline Eccles, is with us to sing both the Barber Knoxville of summer of 1915 and Rosa Parks's aria from She Who Dared.
What an incredible thing. And so the music, I can imagine would, just based on the title, when they ask me to stand, will I? I'm imagining that there might be some heroic sounding music in it, to sort of, hype the person, but also that question, will I? I wonder how that part of the music might reflect that kind of inner turmoil in the same sort of way, or a similar sort of way that Knoxville Summer of 1915 might have evoked a little inner turmoil.
Very much. And the music is much more introspective than you might imagine, because the question is really for herself. Will she be able to do it when asked to do it? And Jasmine's music, she grew up in a church. And so her music is a blend of jazz, gospel, blues, as well as popular 50s styles of Black music into this realm of classical music. There's something that's very impressionistic actually about this particular aria that reminds me a little bit of Ravel. And it's really a beautiful, gorgeous piece of music, and our listeners can find it on YouTube actually and hear me conducting Jacqueline Eccles in this particular aria during a workshop. And it's such a stunning piece of writing, vocally, orchestrally, and it's for a very intimate ensemble. It's a string quintet, I should say, with an extra cello. So you have 2 violins, viola, 2 cellos, and a bass, and then you have piano, percussion, and a few wind instruments. And it's really colorful, but yet intimate.
I love that. The sparseness of that instrumentation would allow the audience a chance to really hear each of the instruments, but also that wonderful blend that can happen with small groups like that. Fantastic. Well, I think this is an interesting follow-up here with the next piece by Matt Brown, I Have Seen the Future. Now, this is a co-commission, is that right?
So yes, this is the product of the Kreitler Commission competition that is headed by the Cincinnati Chamber Orchestra. And Reno Chamber Orchestra is proud to be one of those 4 organizations that produces or presents this particular competition-winning piece to the audience. So the piece does not exist. It's just basically the competition is to identify a composer that the 4 organizations would like to commission, and that's what happened. So Matt Brown is a Colorado-based composer. He got his bachelor's at University of Colorado Boulder. and went on to get his DMA at Michigan. So we should call him Dr. Brown, really. But he was the person who survived the compositional competition gauntlet, so to speak, and was the very first winner of their commission competition. And so that piece is being premiered by the Cincinnati Chamber Orchestra in August of 2025, and then Reno Chamber Orchestra is presenting it in this February-March period.
My goodness, so it is really hot off the press. And,
very much so.
And what do we know about it? Anything at all? Other than the title, I Have Seen the Future.
Yeah, he wrote a little bit of program notes now. I'll just quote him. He says, I've long wanted to create music that pays homage to the film and television scores of the late 50s through the 60s. Works by composers like Bernard Herrmann, early Jerry Goldsmith, Alex North, Quincy Jones, and Marius Constant. And the scores of that era had a bold, brash dissonance and a raw, unpolished edge, punctuated by lush melodies and bizarre textures. Compared to the grand, sweeping orchestrations of earlier decades, they carried a grittier, more pulpy sensibility.
Oh, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
So
the title, I Have Seen the Future, comes from a museum exhibit from the 1939 World's Fair that was in Flushing, New York. And there was, amongst the artifacts, a simple button with the phrase, I have seen the future, printed on it. And so he says, I've always been fascinated by how past generations envisioned the future and how often the boldest predictions ended up being wildly off the mark. So the piece is structured like a 1960s science fiction short story anthology. Each movement is inspired by historical writings on artificial intelligence and robotics. Isn't that amazing and more topical for what's happening right now?
You cannot get anything more topical than what's happening right now. That is pretty amazing. Well, that's going to be really, really exciting for everyone to hear and feel like we've got two kind of back-to-back, hot off the press new works. And what can you tell us about the final piece on the program? This piece by Douglas Moore called Farm Journal.
So Douglas Moore, and I've heard of him previously because one of his most, really his only piece that's really remained in the American repertory is a piece called The Ballad of Baby Doe, a very, very well-known opera, folk opera, so to speak, that's remained in literature in opera land. And his music is sort of neo-romantic, very much influenced by American folk music. It's almost always works having to do with American subjects. Very lyric, popular, and if you want to call it conservative style. This is who Douglas Moore is, and his music has sort of fallen off of the wagon, so to speak, since then, because it didn't really fit through the music that was being created, the serial music we've been talking about earlier, something that was full of consonants, and nostalgia wasn't necessarily welcomed with open arms at a time when people were dealing with the war and the various wars, I should say, and the distance that was being explored through music.
And it's called Suite for Chamber Orchestra, is that right? So it's multiple movements?
Correct, multiple movements, and it essentially reminds me of Copland's Rodeo. In fact, if you dropped the needle and if you didn't know Rodeo intimately, like a lot of Americans do, even if they never sat in on a concert, they just recognize so many parts of Rodeo from their social media and whatever they're watching. Farm Journal is right out of that same book. You turn a page and it sounds like Copland.
So just a very, very kind of stamped Americana kind of sound.
Correct. But full of energy and full of dance and full of mood and nostalgia. It's exactly the kind of piece that I wanted to have for this program. And it fits the brand of bringing lesser known jewels by well-known composers, or in this case, lesser known composers, to our audiences.
Well, we've had some really wide-ranging conversation on this episode. I wonder if you have anything that you're particularly excited about, or some final thoughts.
I did, before I let you go, wanted to also bring up a little nugget of trivia regarding Knoxville that you might find particularly interesting. And that is, after the premiere that Kusevitsky conducted in Boston, Barber went back and revised it into more of the current more intimate orchestration, so he downsized it. and I'll give you one guess as to where it was premiered. This revision of Knoxville's orchestration.
Well, it was Kusevitsky. I'm going to just say Tanglewood.
It was Dumbarton Oaks.
Oh my goodness! I could have. Wow. So you've got a thread now running through the entire season that might be a little bit of a puzzle or a game for some of the listeners to really find the little nuggets that attach all of the programs together, other than the broad theme of America's birthday.
Right. There are definitely Easter eggs I've planted here and there, some intentionally and some unintentionally that I find out a little bit later. But I love it, coming up with these little nuggets of happiness.
That is really wonderful. I love the nerd quotient that's in this room right now, Kelly.
That's the name of the next broadcast, Nerd Quotient.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much for spending time with me today again and chatting through this incredible sounding program. I hope everyone who is listening or watching to this podcast is really getting excited to listen to these performances. And thank you so much again. Cheers.
Cheers. Always a pleasure, Catherine.